newspapermen meet such interesting people. They know the lowdown, now it can be told. I'll tell you quite reliably off the record about some charming people I have known. For I meet politicians and grafters by the score, killers plain and fancy, it's really quite a bore. Oh, newspapermen meet such interesting people. They wallow in corruption, crime and gore. Ting-a-ling-ling, city desk, full of press, extra, extra, read all about it, it's a mess, meets the test. Oh, newspapermen meet such interesting people. It's wonderful to represent the press.
We're grateful to have you this week on The Media Project, your half hour of commentary and analysis on issues in the news media. And we hope that you get something of value out of our ruminations here. I'm Rex Smith with Rosemary Armao, Ira Fusfeld, and Dr. Alan Chartock. That would be the editor, the investigative reporter, the publisher, and Dr. Chartock. So,
Wait. Just wait 1 second. Just wait 1 second here. I am a former publisher of the Fire Island Sun. I want to make sure that everybody understands that.
The Fire Island Sun, yes.
Mm-hmm. And the publisher of the Legislative Gazette newspaper. So if you, with your pompous imperialism, would just stop.
All right, we're off and running, folks. So here's a question that I want to posit to the group, and Dr. Chartock, you can get your first shot at it if you like here.
Sure.
It has to do with the coverage of the coronavirus, of course. The fact is that it seems as though we are trying to tell two stories at once because we have a virus that is affecting people in different ways. It is a virus of the unvaccinated where there is not enough concern, whereas the vaccinated Americans seem to be overwhelmed by fear that doesn't really quite match the reality of their lives. The difficulty is, how do we cover this? Having covered this now for well over a year, what can we do? Is there a way to not be underwater on this, say, and not have us be ineffective in trying to convey to people what needs to be done?
Well, you've really had a mouthful there, and you are so right, Rex, that this is a story that has been around for a while, and a lot depends on the readers as well as on the people who put the stories out and what they're going to do. Now, there are people who are just tired of the whole thing. They want to go into New York City. If they live in the suburbs, they just don't want it anymore. And if you're a newspaper, you're playing to the way that people think about things. Is what you're writing going to be either boring or unpopular? And I do believe that is a situation we find ourselves in now. But I'm more interested in what Rosemary has to say about this.
You always say that, Alan, when you don't have any more to say, I think.
That is so right. Or as the old joke goes, you found me out.
You found me out. And I am in a similar situation. It is a very bad problem. We know that people are annoyed with the whole story, with the whole situation that's behind the story. We're just the messenger that gets kicked for it. And yet our job is to keep after it. I think part of the story is that disgust with the whole thing, with the growing impatience, worse than that, on one side for the other. The vaccine resistors are now being blamed, and there's less and less patience with them. No more understanding. How could they be so sadly deluded? It's like you're messing up things for all of us, and we're sick of it. And that's part of the story that we're covering. And as usual, I think the media has to press ahead, keep covering it, keep seemingly repeat the same stuff, because it's been a year and a half of repetition of this now, and we have to just keep doing it, and criticism be damned.
Ira, let me ask you to react to this, because here's a point that I think makes well what I was trying to say, rambling on, as Alan noted. Dr. Nicole Safier, who is on Fox News, actually said something thoughtful in a tweet. She said, the best path forward that will bring the most amount of happiness and health is if vaccinated adults stop overestimating their COVID risk and unvaccinated adults stop underestimating theirs. But that's hard for us to do as journalists, right?
Well, I think the coverage, the media coverage writ large, meaning not just print, but broadcast and cable and radio, et cetera, has shifted in a way that mirrors what's going on and the natural reaction in the country. And by that I mean 75%, I believe, is the current figure of Americans who've been vaccinated. Most Americans' lives are more or less back to normal. Yes, they still wear masks if they're concerned when they go in the grocery store, as I did the other day. There are all sorts of regulations that they have to dance around. But I believe most Americans don't believe that the pandemic has ended, but it has reached a point where we can live more or less normal lives. And that is amplified when you see pictures of football stadiums filled with people, most of them unvaccinated, and baseball stadiums and the like. If we were vaccinated, we seem to be safe. Those who are not vaccinated, less so. And as this all relates to coverage, I believe the coverage reflects that. We're not covering it nearly as high up on the news cycle as we used to, but we're still covering it every day. We're reporting it. But I think that it's fallen almost into the flu category.
You know, Ira, I have a few problems with what you just said. First of all, the numbers are not going down. They're going up. There are more people.
Among non-vaccinated people.
No, among everybody. In other words, it's true that the people who are non-vaccinated are at the greatest risk. But we also know that there are people who are getting the disease even though they've been vaccinated. And that has to be covered. And it scares the hell out of me. I don't know about anybody else who I've not only had the first shot, the second shot, but now the third shot. And it's a very scary proposition. And if there's anything that newspapers thrive on, it's scary propositions.
Well, I don't dispute, and in fact, I said that the media is still covering this story. I'm just saying that it's not the number one story on the nightly news every night. It's become more normal part of our routine, and the country's getting used to it.
I don't know. You know, my wife wants to go into New York, and she just is always putting herself, in my opinion, at risk by wanting to do that. Boy, am I going to catch it for this. But I think the job of the press is to say, okay, this is still a very risky proposition, like it or not.
It is a nuanced issue, though, which is really difficult to get across. 45% of Americans get most of their news from television, 18% from social media, and that kind of coverage tends to be what gets our attention. It has to be delivered in a quick way to deal with our short attention span. And so what we're talking about here are nuances. That is, the risk to your wife, Alan, is probably less than what you're estimating since she's vaccinated. And, there have been a lot of experts saying we're moving toward a situation where we will be dealing with COVID-19 as we deal with the flu. Some people die from the flu every year. Fewer than half of Americans get the flu shot, though they could protect themselves if they did. And we are moving in this direction where the complexity of the story, the risk to certain people and the lack of risk to others is really hard for us to convey, especially in an environment where people are getting their news from sources that have to deliver it on a really quick, let me get your attention basis.
Well, I've gotten interested in the last couple of weeks looking at arguments from what I consider the other side. I'm obviously pro-vaccination. So looking at the argument from people who attacked Dr. Fauci, who attacked the science, and, the DeSantises of the world. And do they have a point that the media is missing? Like, their point is, why are we putting all our eggs in the basket of vaccination? Why aren't we looking at treatments the way DeSantis has? He's put in, the Regeneron cures, which are quite expensive and yet very effective in treatment. And Mary Beth Pfeiffer, who is, we know her in New York as a former, excellent investigative reporter in Poughkeepsie, has written about, she actually is an Ivermectin supporter, but her real point is, why are we not dealing with treatments? The government and the medical establishment, if you will, which she is opposed to, are just putting all the eggs into the basket of you got to get vaccinated or there's no other hope. And is that really true? And does the media go along with that in our quest to be scientific and evidence-based? Are we not asking bigger questions the way conservatives and vaccine resistors are asking them?
I'm not sure we're not doing that, but I am sure that the emphasis on vaccination is because vaccinations have proven to be effective. I mean, I think that by all means there ought to be stories on what might be considered outlier potential cure, but vaccination, we do know from history, recent history, they work. I mean, I think a bigger story right now is why there are no vaccinations for children. Even those of us who have been vaccinated and are of a certain age, we have children and grandchildren who are not vaccinated and ought to be, and we're willing to have them vaccinated. I just don't understand the science all these many months later that there is not a vaccine that's been approved for use by children. That's a story that I would be going after.
Darn, I agree with every word Ira said.
Well, you sort of skipped over my point, though. I think that Ira is right, but Regeneron also works. It's not a matter of we only tout what works. Regeneron is really expensive, but okay, so are vaccines, and we are providing them free. So there is something odd going on with the way the establishment works and the way we cover it and give approval to some things and disapproval to others or ignore others.
Well, we were chastised as a group of media projectors here for some sort of offhand comments that we made in perhaps the last show about ivermectin. And I think I'm probably the guilty party here, referred to this horse dewormer and the difficulty.
You were not wrong in that, by the way, Rex. It is a horse dewormer.
It is a horse dewormer, yes. It is also in human dosage, prescribed for other purposes, but it is certainly not approved for treatment of the coronavirus and has in fact shown in any studies that they have done that it's not effective. Yet there are some people who have been buying it in veterinary supply quantities, and the question that was raised in a letter that we got is, did we, in belittling the people who are buying this horse dewormer to treat their virus, to offset it, did we jump on that because it helps further the stereotype of the antivirus forces as being ignorant rural rubes or something like that?
There is something to that. It's the same with hydrochloroquine, which we jumped on because we don't like Trump. We, the media, don't like Trump, and so we wanted to make him look foolish. But in fact, medically, there was some reason to look at that drug and to see if it had properties that could help in coronavirus. It was not completely off the wall, and the same with ivermectin. And yes, subsequent tests have shown, no, it's not effective, don't use it. And people who take doses intended for 1,200-pound horses, I'm sorry, that is a stupid rube, and we're right to call it that. But the idea that we just dismiss things when the other side brings them up, and I'll go back to whether the virus jumped out of Wuhan's lab or was put out by evil scientists in China, we ignored that because we didn't like the source of the information, which was the conservative Republican side.
Well, we were also more prone to listen to the scientists. We listened to the CDC, we listened to Fauci, and what they were touting was the established scientific way to go, which primarily meant vaccinations. I mean, how many interviews, if you go back to whenever the virus started, and what was the first question they would ask the experts? When are we going to have a vaccine? And that was what we have been fixated on. And it just sounds funny to say, oh, yeah, there's this treatment that's given to horses. Humans will take that. I mean, our initial reaction, I would say understandably, is, well, that's a lot of baloney.
Except that we were wrong. And even Fauci himself now says, oh, we got to keep an open mind. And that's what I'm saying. We initially go in and we want the scientists to be right. We want the Biden administration to be right. And so we tend to not listen to what the other side is saying. I think that's really dangerous and biased.
I'm a little concerned with the other side. The press isn't one side, is it?
Well, it's
yes, I would say.
Yeah, I think the media does reflect a bias in favor of science, let's say, and certainly there is. Most journalists are politically to the left of, let's say, Donald Trump and his ilk. But that's partly because we have such a reliance on fact as being sort of the basis of what we're supposed to do. And I know people are rolling their eyes and saying, oh, well, this is journalists self-justifying. But it is true that we try very hard to get things right. We believe in science. We believe in substantiating what we do. And that leads us to a bias against people who lie repeatedly. And so when occasionally even Tucker Carlson probably gets something right every now and then, it's very hard for most of us in mainstream news coverage to accept that what we're hearing there has any validity. And the country, but this reflects a division in the country. Gallup polling says 40% believe that Joe Biden has communicated a clear path of action. 42% say he hasn't. The country is quite divided, and we're yet a group of journalists trying very hard to serve a diverse nation.
But,
Correct, and that's exactly why I'm saying that we need to listen to the other side a lot better than we have. Just now you referred to it as lies. It turned out not to be a lie that the virus may have escaped from the lab. It turned out to be not a lie that Regeneron is a treatment that works. You don't need necessarily, vaccines are probably the best, but you don't need to rely only on that. Ivermectin does have some properties that could help in the treatment. Time after masks are a good thing to wear. Fauci changed his mind on that too. By following the science, by taking this high and mighty course that we're only going to look at the evidence of what the scientists say, we have missed a number of facts in this case, and it has led to the distrust from the other side.
Wait a minute. By following the science instead of the anti-science, that's what you're saying? We should listen to the anti-science?
We should not listen to it. We should not just ridicule them, call it lies, as we just are right now, and look into what they're saying. There is evidence for some of the stuff they're saying. It's not completely off the wall.
Okay.
Well, no, I don't agree with that, Rosemary, because the media did a pretty good job when some of these ideas about where the virus came from and stuff, there was or what it contained, there were immediate reliance on the scientists and going. And by the way, Fox does not mirror what the New York Times says either. And you guys cautioned me time and time again not to lump the media into one pot. And I think that's something important to remember now.
Okay, so the right-wing media is saying, we got to not have vaccines, and the Chinese are evil and they unleashed this on us. And then the liberal, the good media, what I would call the good media, the legacy media, is saying, no, the scientists say this. Oh, wait, they changed their mind, and now they're saying this. Why can't we just step back and say to Fauci, people are pushing ivermectin. Are they really so crazy? And what about this? And what about that? There are credible arguments on the side of people who are wrong, and the scientists have been wrong. And we've reported that, and it looks like flip-flopping because we won't listen to the people who we disagree with. I'm speaking too much here, and I'm not making sense. But what I'm calling for is more open-mindedness on the part of science writers in the press.
I think you're making sense. It's just that it's a very complex issue because science does change, as you pointed out. Initially, we didn't think that masks would protect us. And then when it became clear that people should be wearing masks all the time, well, by that time, Donald Trump had turned it into a political issue.
Right.
I mean, frankly, I do think the problem with this is a political problem first, which has then manifested itself as a communication issue. People are dying of this disease, but in fact they're dying due to misinformation or even just simply paying no attention to the information. A lot of the people who are creating the greatest risk are those who simply avoid paying attention to the news media.
The latest example of that is the question of booster shots. I mean, I believe about a month ago when they said we're going to need a third shot, those of us who believe in vaccines and are of a certain age are ready to start lining up immediately. Now we're hearing stories that they're recommending we put a hold on booster shots. Well, which is it? It's the confusion, and as we've said, the messaging is messing with our minds, and by our, I mean the media's.
Yeah, Ira, there's no question about that third shot, but they've said hold off. And the reason they're saying hold off is we got to study it more. But these are also...
That was not their initial point. They didn't say anything about study. They said we're going to get one and it'll be available in October.
Yeah, that's true.
Now they're saying hold.
And why are they saying...
One thing to look at is the hold that misinformation has on people. You are right. Misinformation is killing people. But why are they misinformed? Because they do not trust the media that's relying only on the scientists. It looks like they're flip-flopping. It looks like they're ignoring the other side. Again, an argument for open-mindedness, I think, would go a long way. Is Rand Paul right about anything when he talks about Fauci? Is there anything to be said about hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin that would make the other side think it's such a good deal? We are ignoring that, and that makes us.
No, we're not ignoring that. I think we are appropriately questioning people who lie to us repeatedly and who are killing people with misinformation. That would be Rand Paul. That would be Fox News. So I think you need to be careful in saying the media needs to pay more attention to the people who denigrate science. I don't think that our job is to go along with the anti-science crusaders. It is to rather try as best we can to reflect the uncertainty of science, which does flop around a bit, right?
That's fair, but even look at this letter that came into us. Our immediate reaction was, who is this guy writing with this stuff? Not, hey, does he have a point? And that's the same. Rand Paul is not anti-science. He is a doctor. I think he's wrong about a lot of things, but we've never sat down and examined that. Why is he so anti-Fauci? Who should we be trusting?
Well,
there are stories that could be written about our own confusion.
Well, he is because he's a jerk. I mean, that's quite clear.
Here we go. Now we got a good analysis. Alan Chartock, Rosemary Armao, Ira Fusfeld, and I'm Rex Smith, and we are the Media Project. You can share your views, media@wamc.org. Here's one from a reader, actually, from a listener, and Mahopac, who says, I ask you to discuss the media's responsibility to use correct language when reporting on the Texas anti-abortion law. First, repeating the law bans abortion after 6 weeks does not make clear that it refers to the last menstrual period, which means approximately 4 weeks into the pregnancy, right? And repeating the term fetal heartbeat is incorrect. The medical profession says the fluttering can be heard at 6 weeks is not by the heart at that point of gestation. You know, this is a very interesting point because the legislation is referred to in Texas as the heartbeat bill. Those who have supported the anti-abortion Texas law repeatedly use that term heartbeat when in fact what is being heard there is an electrical impulse in the embryo. There's not a heartbeat, of course, at 4 weeks. So it is an interesting point that is raised, a correct point, but in reporting about the bill, you always have this difficulty because the terms that politicians apply to things are not necessarily scientific, as we've been discussing, but they are the way they are labeled. And by taking the shorthand, we run the risk of actually purveying an untruth.
Well, at the end of the day, the Supreme Court acted, what do they call it, a shadow decision, rarely.
Shadow docket.
Hardly transparent, number one. And number two, the end result was to effectively ban abortions in Texas. And I have no knowledge, wouldn't dare to criticize the facts that the letter writer made, but that deeper in the weeds than the basic story, which seems to me has been covered accurately.
Well, you know, the United States Supreme Court at this stage of the game is a Trump court. It was appointed, many of them, for their views on abortion. And if the press really had the necessary cojones in all of this, they would say that. They would point it out time and time again that this is not a court. This is something that is very different from what we would expect of a fair and unbiased judiciary. And we're not getting that.
I do think that the words matter, and the words in the abortion debate are all euphemisms and public relations, pro-life, pro-choice. Both sides want to portray themselves as being in favor of something when, in fact, they are pro and anti-abortion. Why don't we just say that? And whether you call it an unborn child or a fetus or an embryo, that does make a difference. And she's absolutely right. The fetal heartbeat is not a heartbeat at that age. And I think the case, when it gets into the weeds, will point that out. And AOC did a great service when she was countering Governor Abbott, who was arguing that, no, we're not banning abortion. You have 6 weeks after you've been raped or you're the victim of incest and you can get an abortion. And, of course, that is biologically impossible because you do not know at 6 weeks. You're at most 2 weeks late for a period. And most women who have not ever been pregnant have been 2 weeks late for a period. So you're not even suspecting a pregnancy then. And she pointed it out. And that's great because it should be women telling these yahoos in Texas how they have messed up this law. And I agree with Alan that I don't think the Supreme Court is going to get us out of this. It's going to be women taking over the debate and trying to set it right. We have a long way to go on this issue.
It's a very difficult thing when the label on a law is intentionally misleading. It is referred to by the sponsors as the Texas Heartbeat Act. And we know, as you're saying, this is not actually heartbeat, but I don't know that it's true that we need to do, as Alan says, point out that the Supreme Court is not really a court. It is that. I think that we've had pretty effective coverage showing that this is the impact of Donald Trump's presidency, what we're seeing happening. I don't feel as though journalists have not pointed that out, and the fact that we are here talking about the shadow docket, that this was done in the middle of the night without a full argument on the merits of the case, I think that's been pointed out by journalists pretty effectively. I don't know how you're supposed to do any more than what they've done.
Well,
yeah,
I couldn't disagree more. The fact of the matter is, if you poll most people in the United States, they have no idea what the hell you're talking about. They have no idea what went on in the court, who appointed the court, and the rest of it. No, this court needs examination by journalists that is thorough and complete and tells the story.
Well, I think there's been that.
What'd you say, Fred? I mean, Rex.
No, this is Ira, Fred. Listen, I wouldn't say every story about the Supreme Court lists who the president appointed, which of the judges was appointed by whom, but many of them do. I can read any number of stories where it says, Kavanaugh appointed by Trump or so-and-so appointed by Obama. So I don't believe the use of the word never is accurate there. But
You're a journalist.
Certainly it's not done every time.
You're a journalist, Ira. You went to college. You are among the elite in the United States who read this stuff and understand it. But I don't think we as journalists do right by letting people know at every level of our society what's really going on here.
Well, the real point also is that this is a court purposefully and deliberately set up to go after Roe v. Wade. Trump promised that he was going to look for justices that would overturn or be willing to overturn. He touted each one of his 3 appointees as people who are opposed to abortion rights. And I have seen that in articles, but on the other hand, you're also right, Alan, you can't make people read or listen to the reports you do. I don't know what the media is supposed to do about those who ignore the news.
Do a better job.
Do a better job. I don't know. That's a wonderful charge. The problem is you have to be quick and superficial. Once again, remember that percentage of Americans who get most of their news from television, they want it in bites. And when we're talking about science, we're talking about the way a court operates. These are complex issues, and we just don't have a patience for that anymore. We have people who react to sloganeering, and unfortunately, thank you, Rupert Murdoch, we have a media ecosystem now that is focused more on getting a political point across than getting information that is accurate into people's hands. I really think the denigration of the media ecosystem began with the creation of Fox News. Might not have been as bad as it is now in America if it weren't for the way Rupert Murdoch influenced the media overall starting 15 years ago.
If you're not watching the series called Gossip, it's a 4-part series on Showtime, which very heavily focuses on the New York Post and on Murdoch. I recommend it. It's an eye-opener.
Yeah, terrifying, as a matter of fact. It shows how we got to where we are.
Exactly, Rex. And for those of us who are a little older, and I am, I remember the Post when it was considered to be the great liberal bastion of all time. And then along comes Murdoch, he buys it, and it just goes to show all of us, doesn't it, that newspapers who we want to be unbiased and read out the news really go to the highest bidder.
Well, we'll have to let it go at that point, I'm afraid. That would be Dr. Alan Chartock of WAMC, Rosemary Armao, Ira Fusfeld, and I'm Rex Smith. And we are grateful to our producer, David Castina, for putting up with us, and you also for joining us this week on the Media Project.
The Media Project is a production of WAMC Northeast Public Radio. Alan Chartock is CEO of WAMC, Professor Emeritus at the State University of New York, commentator, columnist, and author. Rex Smith is the former editor of the Albany Times-Union. Rosemary Armao is an investigative journalist and former chair of the Department of Journalism at the University at Albany. And Ira Fusfeld is the publisher emeritus of the Daily Freeman. You can listen to or podcast the Media Project anytime at WAMC.org or just download the WAMC app for your iPhone or Android at the Play Store today. Thanks for listening.